Um,
No, it's I've got things to say. That would be good.
and I was just Ray was just asking about like how did Swedenborg actually publish his books in terms of he would write it out by hand, and then I was saying how he would make a fair copy, and then the fair copy is what would go to the printer. And I was just about to say that isn't Swedenborg like unique in that he was very efficient and would just make one fair copy or maybe two in certain cases, but he was mostly just like a one and done kind of a guy or
Yes, paper was super expensive back then, and so at his usual process seems to be that he would create kind of an outline, like the main headings. One of the things, well, I'll talk about that some more in a little bit, but there are features of his works that you can sort of tell that this is how they come together. So he'll put together a list of headings. I think it's from the way that debate would happen back in the day. You know, a lot of your training, a lot of your education was, okay, they wouldn't use this example, but I'm just picking one off the top of my head. You say smoking is okay, or that people should have that freedom to smoke cigarettes, and then you make the argument that it's bad, and the government should shut it down or something like that. And so it doesn't matter what your position is; you're just supposed to be ready to get up in that argument and make the best case you possibly can. And so there was a lot of thought put into sort of assembling what would your bullet points be? If you were going to write a book about so and so, these would be the 12 points you're trying to say. And so I think a lot of that would happen in Swedenborg's mind first, like he would arrange his points. And then sometimes he would write, we have manuscripts where he writes those down. There are some manuscripts where you can see him. There's a late work called Coronis, that was never published, where you actually have sort of four outlines. And I think people didn't realize these are four outlines of the same thing. So if you read it sequentially, you get a pretty bad sense of deja vu. But he's sort of roughing it out. And that would be about it for any kind of preliminary. I would almost call that draft zero. He just roughs something out. And so sometimes you'll see on scraps of paper, you'll get one of those little lists of here are the topics. At the beginning, for example, of his work on the prophets and Psalms, which was never published, but certain things of it sneak into his published works, explaining the inner meaning of the prophets and the Psalms in the Bible. He gives a list of 17 topics that occur on page one. Page one, these are the 17 topics. And then in every single one, he says, blah, 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 this means this, and that's topic 12. This means this, that's topic 15. It's very different than the way, I don't know, the way I work. Like when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, I had to write the whole thing, read it to begin to understand what I was saying. And then, and then I could go back and put headings in and signposts and tell the dear reader, here's where we're going, because I only just figured it out myself, and the headings would be one of the last things that would go in. With Swedenborg, the headings are first. And so that's why his headings are sometimes so long, because they sort of, it's almost like you could read the book as just headings. Not all of his work has those kind of headings, but Heaven and Hell and a number of the sections of True Christianity, sometimes they're a half a page. They're a whole sentence of this and this and this. Blah, 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 blah. It's not just sort of point number 2 about so and so. They have a whole sentence in there sometimes. And then what he would do was that he would write to those points. So when he's working okay, that's what I need to do. And so sometimes what would happen is when he's writing to a point number 6, he includes some stuff that actually bears on point number 7. So he'll write a long heading for number 7. And then he'll say, I already talked about this. And you think, well, how did this happen? You know, but partly it's that business of very, very few drafts. And so he would sit down and do a first draft uh, out of that outline kind of thing. And something he would often do, even from the very beginning of his published theological works, he would be indexing himself as he went. He used section numbers and he would index as he went, which was very handy for cross-referencing, because he's writing in what we've generally called the geometrical style based on Euclid's geometry, where you establish one thing. Okay, we got that down, Pat. You with me? Okay, now here's number two. If you do a line from here, that means this. So you see what I mean? And then it all builds on itself. And he uses that same kind of reasoning. Some people call it QED, because often in those books you'd have quod erat demonstrandum, which was to be demonstrated. That's what my point was. So blah, 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 blah. So there, I've done it. You see? And then you move on to the next thing. And so that's kind of the way he thinks in a lot of what he presents. And so I think it's an interesting way to work. I've never really tried it, because I still have to just write the thing and then break it into sections and then figure out headings. And I mean, I have a sense of where I'm going, but I really need to write it to figure out how the story turns out. It really surprises me that even with his biblical exegesis, he would function this way. You can see in what's called Apocalypse Explained, or we call it Revelation Explained, an unpublished manuscript, but stopped partway through chapter 19 in mid-verse, just suddenly grinds to a halt. In one I can tell you a little more about how he's working in that book, but then you have an outline of chapter 20. Like, he didn't get there, but he's already got his outline. Now, to me, I would need to work on it and get some other passages, and then I would figure, okay, this is what, and then I'd bring that back and say, okay, this is what this verse means. I still don't really get how he was able to work from this is what this verse means, say that first, and then just, go from there. But I think it was a time when a well-educated, intelligent person like Swedenborg people had a tremendous memory. They used their memory a lot. They had to, they didn't rely on cell phones or phone books or things like that. They just sort of had to remember a lot of things. And I think he would hold these works. Some people have said Swedenborg had a really remarkable powers of focus and concentration, and he would do what he called meditating a lot. I'm not sure exactly what all was included in that, but I think a lot of it was just penetrating a subject with his mind, just like screen out everything else and really think deeply about this one thing for a long time, probably aided quite a bit by the long nights of the Swedish winter and so on. There wasn't much else to do, and 4 hours of daylight or something. So he could really think these things through. And then writing was almost an afterthought. You write the thing out, but it's not like he's learning as he's writing all the time. I mean, he already figured out the key things he wanted to say. And then, so that's sort of first draft, what we call a rough draft. He would copy that for the printer. That was it. He would make changes sometimes when he was copying it, but basically he would copy that thing over. And we know from the aforementioned Apocalypse Explained how he worked. If we didn't have that, we'd be much more in the dark. But there he was going to publish it and he didn't. And fascinatingly, from the beginning of the work up to section 1232, which takes 6 volumes in English to trot out, he had a rough draft and a fair copy, rough draft, fair copy. And in the fair copy, he's writing how big the font is he wants. He's circling where I want an ornament here. There's how the title page should look. He's really in there with the, okay, shrink the type here. And now this is italics and so on, instructions for the printer, and goes along. And then at some point he says, end of volume 1, the end of chapter 6. And then you never hear about volume anymore. And pretty soon you're not hearing about printing anymore. And yet he's still writing a rough draft and a fair copy. And when the thing ends, the rough draft goes to section 1232 and the fair copy stops at 1229, if memory serves. In other words, he's only like a half day, like every day. He does a rough draft, even though he'd given up like a year and a half ago on the idea of publishing this thing. By the time he's gotten through thousands and thousands of pages of this thing, uh, he's for some mysterious reason still copying it over as a fair copy. And sometimes what he'll do is he'll write just the biblical chapter. He doesn't want to sort of have to use the quill pen over and over again. And so he'll just write that in one place. And then you'll see when you get to that point, he'll just do squiggles that mean copy that stuff in here. You know what I mean? You know.
Mm.
And so he's trying to work as efficiently as he can. And then he would send that fair copy off to the printer. So he's got his rough draft. And astonishingly to me, he would then destroy the rough draft.
Yeah.
So you've only got one thing. You've got that published volume. That's it. And so, and he would destroy the fair copy too, you know, or the printer would. And so in most cases, we don't have a rough draft. In most cases, we don't have a fair copy. We only have one thing, which is that there was only one print run. There's no second edition or whatever, you know, like it's a very simple tradition. Like here's this printed work and everything else just disappeared. He was not very sentimental about saving stuff, it seems like. But there are a couple of exceptions to that. One was this work on the Book of Revelation, the Apocalypse Explained, where he didn't finish it. And so he saved both of those copies of what he'd been working on and went back and drew from that again later, although he changed the work radically, which is another very interesting topic for another day. But the other situation is that generally he was often working on these things right there. He often would take lodgings not far from the printer, and he would be going in there and reading pages every day as the work is coming out. But in the case of his first theological work, Secrets of Heaven, Arcana Coelestia, he was there in England when the first volume was published, but then he went back first to another place and then finally back to his home in Stockholm, I think for sake of anonymity and so on. So he was mailing that. He was mailing it in across the world. And you can't really, it's hard for us to imagine how big the world was back then. You know, that to get from Sweden to England would take a month, you know, like it's hard to fathom when you can get on a plane in 2 hours and you're there or something. But it was a long way, and sailing was fraught with trouble. And there's always seems like somebody was shooting at somebody in those waters. And so he kept his rough draft of volumes 2 through 8, not the first one because he was there, but and I don't know why. He doesn't say this. I just made this up. But I think because he was publishing that at a distance, it was just like, oh man, if the boat goes down,
yeah.
there's a year and a half of my life, you know, like what am I going to do? So I'll save the rough draft and then I can reconstruct it if anything happens. Nothing happened. It was okay. But luckily we have that copy, and that's been very instructive too, to see what changed a little bit from the rough draft. We don't have the fair copy, but we have the rough draft and the printed volume. And so the third Latin edition, which I think, Felicia, you were asking about, is that a good edition? Does the interesting thing of comparing the first edition to that manuscript at every point, and its footnotes are a lot about the little differences between those two sources. You never know with a printed volume whether the typographer, the conditions of publishing these books was crazy. They were working in these dark little homes. They had to work out of their own home. It's often dark, you know, and you're up in London or Amsterdam or whatever, and it's these long dark winters, and they don't have a lot of light. And then you're working with these tiny pieces of type backwards.
Yeah.
You know, So can you easily tell the difference between an R and an F backwards, or what, like or even just like things like a B and a D, where it looks the right way around to you, like your mind. It's like those faces where they turn the face upside down, but they switch the eyes. Have you seen those? And the mouth? And then they look pretty normal when you see them upside down. Then you turn the right way up. It's horrifying. But our mind just naturally turns it the other way up. It's amazing that the works have as few typographical errors. They have plenty, but it's astonishing. And so the typographer is certainly capable of introducing a certain element of chaos. And as Swedenborg got older and his eyes were not quite as good, and he decided to, for whatever reason, I think, again, because of the cost of paper, he shrunk his typeface in the last work, True Christianity. He kept the same typeface in all the others, the size of the type, I mean. He had a different type in London than he did in Amsterdam, but he shrinks the type in the last work, and you have more typos in there because I think his old eyes, he was the proofreader, he didn't pay for a proofreader or whatever. Um, so you never quite know, but if you have a first draft and a published volume, did Swedenborg say to change this? Did the typographer's eye skip from that line to that line? Because Swedenborg does often say very similar things in this sentence to what he said in the previous sentence. And so your eye can skip down. There's one case in which he put, the typographer actually put, there was an ampersand, which they used for and the typographer actually put the English word and right in this Latin word. That is just, that's fun. Or sometimes you can see that. I think that was the typographer. I don't think Swedenborg, put the English word and in there instead
And
of saying.
would it have been necessary for the people actually making the books, the typographers, to know Latin, or Neo-Latin?
I think it's quite certain that they didn't. There are situations where Swedenborg wrote to them to say there are a bunch of typos in this works of 1758. He was dismayed at the number of typos, and he specifically said to the printer, get John Marchant to make these corrections. Like, you need somebody. Marchant was somebody who had translated few of Swedenborg's volumes into English. Get somebody who knows English and Latin because, and I assume what that means is I don't trust the typographers or they would have apprentices and so, who knows. But I think they got used to it. If you did a lot of that, you'd kind of see things, but sometimes they make mistakes that way because they sort of know a little Latin. And so they think it's likely to be this word, but it was that word. I think of an example that I've seen where there's a common word, tunc, T-U-N-C, which means then. You see that a lot. Then there's a word to that means you, and you can have an enclitic of N-E on the end, to ne. That means, aren't you something or other? You're going to ask a question that expects a negative answer. To ne. Well, you're not used to seeing to ne in Latin. They think it's probably tunc, and they stick a C in there. And then chaos ensues. But yeah, so I exactly right. I think they had their hands full just figuring out how to be a typographer, and they didn't necessarily know Latin. So
I'm just amazed. I can't help but think that Swedenborg must have had really strong hands if he's handwriting, anybody who's having to write and then make a fair copy, and it's just a daily practice. Like when I do any handwriting for a long amount of time, my hand just aches. I'm so not used to it, but if that's just your daily thing, that would be really something. And that he was doing that all the way up until his 80s is like,
that's right. And you can see the handwriting change a
like
little.
the mobility, people being able to have that kind of fine-tuned control over their own hands anyway is something that often decreases with age. And so, and then I'm also,
some people get very shaky or whatever. Yeah, right.
I'm curious if it's somewhat just efficiency and economy in terms of disposing of the rough drafts, because it's like, right, you're also in cold Swedish winters and it's really great to burn paper. Like you need some paper to burn. So it's like, well, I'll also heat my house by writing these books, you know?
Valuable stuff. I've seen, I don't have an example for you here, but I believe there's a volume I've got in my collection where the end papers are a French play upside down, you know,
Yes.
like they're recycled,
Yeah.
you know, we didn't need this anymore. And so they're printed sheets, but they turn them upside
Wow.
down, and turn them into end papers. So I have theorized that there may still be some things that come to light where you would find something in an end paper or just somewhere, you know, that the printers must have gone through a lot of paper, and they by law they had to operate out of their own house. And a lot of the houses in London, like, you know, there were tiny little houses. So you got one job, you got to clear this out of here. We got to get the next job in. And so you've got to get rid of
Yeah.
all that stuff. And so I wonder what happened to these, because I think in a couple of instances, I'm quite sure with True Christianity, and I believe it also happened with New Jerusalem, that Swedenborg changed the title late in the day. The evidence for True Christianity is that in the last week before the volume came out, it had been being published for 9 months. And in the last week, he decided to change the first signature. He changed the title. And so I think he had 1,000 first signatures. You know what a signature is? It's a 8 folded sheet, you know, in a quarto volume. It's like the 8 pages, four sheets, fold it, and so that was sewn together, and then you'd bind them together. That's right. There you go. And
Kind of
and
like
yeah,
anyway.
so sort of a chunk of the work, and so I think Swedenborg got rid of all the like 1,000. Like 8,000 pages of published manuscript, get rid of the first signature and redo it to change the title. And so where are those? Are we ever going to see, is there one, is it floating around somewhere? Is it
Mhm.
binding, or did it all go into the fire? At one point, Swedenborg uses the poetical phrase, committed to Vulcan. No.
Nice.
Did it get committed to Vulcan? And but it would be really interesting if something surfaced. You know, these are just theories of mine that but I have very good evidence that he changed the title at the last minute. One of which, in the case of True Christianity, is that in every work that Swedenborg does, if it's Secrets of Heaven, Arcana Coelestia, the running head says Arcana Coelestia. If it's Divine Love and Wisdom, the running heads, you know what running heads are at the top of the page to sort of tell you which book you're in. They say Divine Love and Wisdom. In True Christianity, the running heads don't say that. They don't say the title. The running heads have a different title.
Hmm.
And I think because he had a working title, and we know there's good evidence from letters he sent to people that had a different working title. And then at the last minute, he decided, I'm changing that title. And he put this new title in, and the only place in the work that it appears is on the title page and page 3. If it was a book about true Christianity, you think it would occasionally mention true Christianity. It doesn't. It's very, very interesting that he has a different, he puts it into a subtitle, what was the working title. And you see that in the running heads. And a similar thing happened in New Jerusalem, but he was able to catch it and change the running heads in that instance. So it must have happened a little early in the process. But he changed.
So what was the working title of True Christianity?
The working title, it had 3 titles, and the first one I think was something like Doctrine of the New Church or something like that. And then the second one was the Universal Theology of the New Heaven and the New Earth, I think, or the New Heaven and the New Church. I forget which, but that's what ended up in the running heads. And then what he has on the actual title page is True Christian Religion, containing a universal theology of the, you know, And so the title becomes a subtitle. And
Mm.
part of why I judge this is that in every one of his major works, he likes to have these big graphic ornaments, these called headpiece ornaments, on kind of page 3. You have a title page, and then you get to page 3 where the main text starts. He'll have a big headpiece ornament. Sometimes it seems pretty clear that he carved these things himself, and they're cool to me. They're not just the most astounding artwork, but they're neat because of what they communicate. And but True Christianity doesn't have one. It has the title shoved all the way up to the top of the page in quite a unartistic fashion. And I think that's because he swapped it out, but he still had to land at the same word on the end of page 8.
Yeah.
You know, so how's he going to fit this in, this new title? And I think he just, okay, we're losing the headpiece ornament. We're going right up into the margin up there. And so it's very high on the page.
It's really fun. I think that Ray and Felicia and I doing the publishing that we're doing at the Swedenborg Foundation to really appreciate these little bits of the running heads and changing a title late in the game and what that means to whatever. And it's like, and then we're working in a context that allows for digital shifts and things like that. So like to appreciate even that Swedenborg is working with such physical, limitations as well. So
yeah. So this is very unusual to have his title this high on the page. Usually it would be dropped down and you'd have a headpiece ornament and you'd start down here. And I think that those 2 lines, I think, were added, and he changed the cases of this stuff to get his new title in there. And then he wrote a note to the Ludwig the Ninth of Hesse-Darmstadt saying, here's the title of my book. And that's the first time you see him write the actual title. And it's just 7 days before the volume came out. And that's partly up until then, there's a number of letters where he's communicating with people and it has the old title.
Do we know why he changed the title? Was there a political reason, or I don't know, cultural reason?
I'll note that we did 1 or 2 episodes of Insight Off the Left Eye on this very thing. I think it even spread over 2 episodes because it is a really interesting sort of a lot of moving parts as he's trying to create, plan, and then create and execute this book of True Christianity that ultimately comes out. But yeah.
I'll try it in one sentence. I think his strategy had been to try to win over the clergy. He'd been under attack from the clergy. And so he'd picked kind of a theological, the universal theology of it, that's the main word, is sort of theology. And he was trying to reach them. But then I think it struck him that there were 4 houses in the Swedish parliament, including the peasants, whatever you want to call them, and had more power in the Swedish government than they normally did in other European governments at that time. And you had the merchants, the business class kind of thing, and the nobility. And I think when he was young, there was a book that they would always read at the dinner table by Johann Arndt called True Christianity. And I think he shifted to a title that was like, this is not academic. I'm not talking to the theologians. This is for everybody. This is a more widespread, and I'm trying to reach all these parts of the government and all parts of there's more that I could say about that, but that's good fun.
Cool. Should we study some Latin?
I think we should. I think that's, it's necessary.
Yes.
So I very recently sent out a passage, 8733. It's a little bit longer, and I don't know if you have that in front of you.
Yeah, I think so.
I am very aware in looking at this that the poor reader has to make numerous large intellectual leaps to get into this material. The first leap is just there is an afterlife. That's a big leap. Okay, there's an afterlife. Number 2, there are inhabitants on other planets, including Jupiter in our own solar system. There are inhabitants there. Huge leap. 3, those inhabitants are humanoid or human-like to the extent that when they die, they become spirits just like we do from this planet. I forget what I'm up to. Number 4, that heaven is in a complete human form. That idea has been around in the Adam Kadmon or whatever, I think in the Kabbalistic view and stuff, but it's still an unusual concept that heaven is one giant human being. 5, that the spirits from different planets play a role like the different functions within our minds and bodies. How's that for starters? Like that's a lot. Okay. So good fun. But this has a bearing on communication. And so I saw this passage. I think I even referenced it briefly last time. So the heading says continuation on the spirits and inhabitants of the planet of Jupiter. So already you're deep in. And I like how large this blew it up a little bit, but those headings are just cool. And there's an ornament, there's a nice line, we call that a line ornament across the top to show that we've shifted into a different type of material. And in Secrets of Heaven, where this occurs, he has biblical exegesis. And then at the end of the chapter, he'll have a very clear ornament like this showing a break in the text. And then he shifts to all italics. It's very interesting. But when you're reading it, you are when you're just flipping through the volume, whoa, you're super clear. Oh, I'm in that strange stuff at the end of the chapter because it's all italics. And you'll even see in the second line there that in order to emphasize imaginativum cogitationis, he made it Roman, because the rules of italics is that if you're going to emphasize, you go Roman. So it really made it stand out. And we felt like in the NCE, we didn't think our readers could stand pages of italics. I just thought, it's just for the modern sensibility, a little rough. So what we did, which might be chickening out, but we just put a red line in the margin to show as you're flipping through. So when you see that red line, you're in this material, which is experiential material at the end of the chapter. But it interests me that Swedenborg's absolutely consistent about this. There's a different type of material that he uses at the beginning of some of the chapters. And if that's sort of doctrinal or theological, he uses all Roman, not italic. The italics are spiritual experiences. Really interesting. And so in some volumes, he starts out the chapter with spiritual experiences. That also is in italics. It's just, he's somebody who paid attention to typography. He'd been around printing. And as I mentioned in Apocalypse Explained, when he writes, look, I want this size font, I want this type of font, we know he had his hand in that. So I like this first sentence here. It's typical of Latin, or typical of this Neo-Latin, Swedenborg's Neo-Latin, in the sense that you get a noun clause, the spirits of the planet Jupiter, and then you go immediately into a subordinate clause, like, and no verb yet. You don't know what we're talking about. Well, let's go off onto a subordinate clause. Okay. And then quia, because in maximo homine, which is that concept I was just referring to, in the greatest human, we use the term universal human in the NCE. So again, we're not in Kansas anymore. Referunt imaginativum cogitationis. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about referunt because it's a cool word. It comes from the Latin, the root of it is fero, F-E-R-O, and fero, as you may know, when you look at a Latin verb, you often say 4 principal parts. You say the fero, which is the first person singular indicative. Then you say the infinitive, and then you say the perfect, the first person singular, the perfect, and then you say the perfect passive participle. Well, for fero is an irregular, it's an irregular verb. Fero, fere, F-E-R-R-E, that's quite fairly normal. The perfect is Tuli, T-U-L-I. Nothing about T-U-L has anything to do with F-E-R. F-E-R, F-E-R, T-U-L. Latum, L-A-T. What?
Wow.
Ferro Ferre Tuli Latum. What seems to have happened is that ages ago, 4 different verbs, Pharaoh didn't have a perfect tense, so they grabbed another verb and stuffed it in there. And they didn't have a passive, so they grabbed it from somewhere else and stuffed it in there. But the reason I mention this is that L-A-T, we have both in English. R-E-F-E-R is an English word, refer, right? And there are lots of things, transfer, things like that, offer, these are Latin of that Ferro Ferre Tuli Latus. But that L-A-T is the same thing, refer, but also relate. Relate is the L-A-T. It comes from the same verb.
Oh.
So it's really interesting. So you could say the spirits of the planet Jupiter, because in the universal human, they refer to the imagination of thought, or you could say they relate to it, which is kind of more how we would do it. And it's interesting, relate is cognate. So anyway, that's just
yeah.
Often English versions of Latin words come off that 4th principal part, not the first couple. Like often that you'll take that last principal part, and that's where the English version of it will come from. So, okay, here's what they relate to. So he's starting right off. Are we ready? We got the heading? Bang. I'm already going to tell you what they mean. They mean, and this is typical of Swedenborg, they mean the imaginativum cogitationis. Imaginativum is an adjective. It's neuter, singular. Cogitationis is a noun, but it's in the genitive. So it's the imaginative noun missing of thought. Typical of Swedenborg. The imaginative what of thought? Oh, he doesn't say.
Huh.
It's just the imaginative of thought. The imaginative what? The imaginative faculty, the imaginative capacity, the imagination, in which case you say, why didn't you just say that? Why do you say the imaginative something or other? And you certainly, I can't think of examples right now, but in the English, we do that. I'll give you a dumb example. When I was growing up in England, they had a biscuit called digestives. Digestives.
I've seen those, digestive.
Yes, that's right. Digestives. And so, well, that's an adjective. And you know what the noun is. There's like, this biscuit will help you digest. So it's a digestive. You have a bunch of them, they're digestives. And we do things like that in English. But you see at the beginning of imag, obviously you see that word imag, like this imago is hiding in there somewhere, right? So the idea of image. So I don't frankly know. I think it's intriguing to think about, does this mean the imaginative capacity of our thought? Mm-hmm. And what exactly does it mean by that? Does it mean literally the image making function that our mind does? Like some things are verbal. I've just been reading about people who don't even form mental thoughts. I mean, they don't form mental pictures, like there are some people, I forget what they call it, but there's a term for it where they don't, you say to everybody, okay, picture an apple. And most people in the room can tell you what the apple looks like. Is it green? Is it red or whatever? And these people just say, I don't see anything. Nothing happens in my head. I don't have that thing. Does it mean just that visualization function? Or you can imagine an imagination that doesn't have to be pictorial. It could be kind of like, oh, imagine a world where people lived in the trees instead of in houses, and imagine that they wore this and they did that. You may be picturing it, you may not, but you could. Are both of those imaginative? what's he talking about? Well, we just have to talk to the spirits from Jupiter to find out.
Can I offer a quick thought? I just wonder,
Please.
in the way that in English we maybe would say, like, to turn something like that into a noun, like just the word that comes to my mind is like imaginativeness, like to turn it into like a quality of thought, like that imaginativeness of this thing, like, or like the
imaginative type of thinking
quality, right, of thought or something.
Right.
But also the phrase thought forms is familiar to me from other spiritual sources. And so I can't help but think of thought forms and that idea when I read this, think about it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Very interesting. And it's so typical of Swedenborg, when he said his most communities give, okay, everybody, drum roll. I'm going to tell you what these people mean. I'll give you an adjective that you won't quite understand, no noun, and then modify it with a genitive of cogitatio. I thought cogitatio is also a great word to think about a little bit, because we always translated thinking and words like that. It's a great example of what I was talking about last time, that if you translated that cogitate or cogitation every time, it would make the text seem kind of remote, like, I feel like I think all the time. I don't know that I ever cogitate. I never think of myself. I'm cogitating, right? Don't interrupt me. I'm cogitating, and that word, as I've thought about it, I was interested to read today that people think it comes from coagitatio, to agitate together. The mental image that comes to mind, I don't know if that's what this means, is that you throw a bunch of things in the dryer and then it turns them around. That's sort of, are we kind of revolving things in our minds or something like that? And of what comes out of that is I realized after a lot of looking at this word that I think it sometimes means plans. I think it certainly can go beyond just the noise that happens in your head or something. Swedenborg is often talking about pretty deliberate activities, like you are picturing what a world would be like, without cars or something, and you're really in there thinking about it. It's not just sort of noise or internal dialogue going on in your head. Yes, Chelsea.
I didn't realize I would be holding up my hand so much. I'm raising my hand. But just another cogitation that is occurring to me is that coagitate, but then you've got that imaginative of coagitation is like the thought that you just gave to me, and thinking about that is the way that these things might be bumping around inside of us, these thoughts, but they sort of create something or sort of expand beyond themselves, and whatever they're expanding into, maybe that's the imaginative, like that, like if it's describing a quality of how we're just thinking, but we're not just in this constant eddy, it goes somewhere, it's this
right
imaginative of that thing, like, I don't know, so that was just sort of a interest, like describing a whole activity or something of those things together.
And I think there's a wonderful kind of thought. So often when movies depict thoughts, they just have an inner dialogue, just it's somebody talking, it's just blah blah blah. When that movie 20-25 years ago about baby, like you get to hear what the babies were thinking or something like that. It's just talking. But the best kind of thinking that goes on in my head that I'm aware of is just often visual images, just pow, it just flashes in one go. I'm in a counseling session or something and I realize, oh, that's like a sailboat and the anchor and the, or something, and it flash. And it's got so much in there. You can go into that image and play around with it and get more information out of it. And quite unlike if you had to describe that boat in language, it would take a lot of, it's a quicker form of thought. I don't know if that's what it's talking about. I love this next little bit that Swedenborg gets. So we haven't had a verb yet. The spirits of the planet Jupiter, because in the universal human, they relate to the imaginative function that happens during thinking. Parum loquuntur et multum cogitant. Adverb, verb, and adverb, verb. It's just nicely structured. And both of the adverbs happen to end in that um. So it's kind of a fun little, it's a fun little bon mot or something. Parum loquuntur et multum cogitat. They say little and think a lot. It's kind of cool. I would have thought, however, that he would say, they think a lot, but don't say much. It's interesting that he starts with the saying. And he doesn't but it, he ands it. Right? They say a little and they think a lot. We would generally but that. By the way, Latin ands and ors and buts are often a Latin or needs to be an English and vice versa. So hold those kind of things lightly. In the NCE, we take the liberty sometimes of, we would put a but there. If it's in English, it's sort of like they don't say much. Those are still waters run deep kind of thing. And when they talk, so this is on those few occasions when they do open their mouths, right? Et cum loquuntur, est loquela illorum cogitativa. Oh, we've got another one of those IVE type of adjectives here. When they speak, their speech is cogitative. Good, okay. Poor Swedenborg. Imagine being one person who's interacted with the spirits of Jupiter, and then your job is to write in Latin what their communication style is to a planet that's never heard of what you're talking about.
Well, I have a question, because why is that capitalized?
Great question.
And then the imaginative cognate, I noticed that what is the meaning behind, and I don't see it in the draft of the translation as being capitalized.
Exactly. Yes, great question. Swedenborg practiced in his first editions what I would call the capitalization of emphasis. And then over time, people decided, no, it should be a capitalization of a reverence. If it's about God or something holy, we should capitalize it.
Okay.
But Swedenborg just capitalizes for emphasis. So what's beautiful is, friends, I don't know if you noticed this, you add it all up, that's one sentence. This entire thing is one sentence, okay? How do you know what the key words are? Oh, well, they're the three that have capitals on them. You know, it's the imaginative of thought and then that cogitative. So he's emphasized it. So that's cool, Now, because of the standards of English style right now, it's very retro to have a whole lot of, it looks kind of like religious wackos, or, to have a lot of capitals in your material. And so we try to figure out other ways to convey that emphasis. We might put it in italics, and when they speak, so they think a lot, they don't say much. And even when they do talk, it's more thought than talk, basically, is what I gather. Even their speech is really cogitative. It's thought-based, I think is how Lisa rendered it. Which, and this is how he chains it all into one sentence. It's fun to see how he does it. And you may have heard me say before, but I'll repeat it again in case that's needed, that the way that they would punctuate back then was much more about reading out loud, or at least it was based on reading out loud. The comma was a pause for the count of one. The semicolon was a pause for the count of two. A colon was a pause for the count of three, and a period was a pause for the count of four. So four is long. It's like sort of halfway through a sermon when and you think it's over and then it's not, and they start up the next part. So the canon 4 is long. So we would break at these semicolons. We would certainly have a period. We would have a lot of periods in here in the NCE, and we would break at the semicolons. We would definitely break at the colon. That might even be a paragraph return, because the colon is a pretty big break. So they're doing different functions than they do in our time. And when they speak, their speech is cogitative, which, and I love you have to flip the word order around. Ab aliorum loquelis differ. Thank you. There's the verb in eo. So which differs from the speech of others. Bounce, 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 bounce. In this, in eo quad. And I like the way Swedenborg would do in this, that. Now you're going to get a noun clause about how it differs. Oh, great. Okay. So at least he can try to tell us. He may not explain what cogitative means, but it differs from other planets types of speech. You know how it is.
Yeah.
All the different planets speak differently. It differs.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just think like, because here you are translating, and maybe this is kind of what you were just saying before, but like when you're presented with having to translate cogitativa, or whether you say it, or g, it's like he's creating a new term there. Like he's not saying, or like he's trying to say, well, what they do is something very unique. We don't have a word to describe it. So, but I'm going to try to describe it to you. So he's defining that term, but so that leaves you like, with not a lot to go on when you're trying to translate it into English. Like you can't.
An English version would be it's thought-y or something, it's it's sort of more thinkish than what you're used to, which differs from the communication styles of others in this, that it does not terminate. And I want to talk a little bit about that word terminate. I even until recently thought that when Swedenborg talks about terminating, because he uses that term in language a fair amount, that he's talking about if you go along in a sentence, then it terminates right here. That's the end of the sentence. So it's going sort of laterally. But here, I think he's really talking about along the lines of what we talked about last time, that language comes down. It's got some sort of emotional component. It's got a thought component, and then it terminates down in some sort of communication. So the whole thing, it's not the end of the sentence. The entire sentence is a termination of something coming down from higher levels. It does not terminate ita so much in sonorum. Thank you. All his helpful words please use your nouns. No, he was not going to use his nouns. In a sonorous neuter singular.
Oh,
Sing now. Thank you. Okay. In something sonorous, in sound-based, you can see the S-O-N in there. It doesn't come down so much into, I would be tempted to translate it articulate speech or articulated sounds or something like that. It doesn't come down so much into sounds or something sound-based.
Like syllables or something like that.
Right. Said in mole quasi murmur, which is our word murmur, right? Comes down into a soft quasi murmur. Quasi, I want to explain a little bit about the word quasi, that quasi, it's often in the old translations translated as it were. Quasi is sort of a hedge word. English is very, very interesting. We are kind of crazy, wild, and loose in some ways in the way that we communicate, because we have absolutely no problem saying that someone is a pig. Like that's not a problem for that sentence is not a problem. So-and-so is a total pig. In Latin, you would have to say that person is, as it were, a pig. Because they aren't a pig, obviously. Like, what are you talking about? Of course, they're not a pig. They're, as it were, a pig-like. And Latin feels the need to do that more than English. We don't need that quasi a lot of the time. but I get it. You're saying, okay. And part of his hedge, I think, here is that, well, how am I going to describe the speech of the spirits of Jupiter? Maybe it's not a literal murmur, but it's, well, it's something murmur like, okay?
Hmm.
But it's mole. It's soft, into a soft kind of murmur.
Interesting. And that like that we would say in English, quasi something something. Like we
Yeah,
use
that's
that
right.
kind of word in
That's
speech,
right.
but it probably means something different in English than exactly what you're saying, as it were. It's not quite
Right.
that.
It can be hard to tell why is it in there this time. And he
Mhm.
puts it in between the soft, in the soft, murmur thing. Something like a murmur. Comma, quod intus volubile est, semicolon, which is inwardly, intus is an adverb, interestingly, even though it looks like a noun. Volubile est, the English word voluble is a fun word. Vol, that VOL, has the root of rolling. I don't know if this is where the name Volvo came from but Volvo, the car, Volvo is a Latin verb meaning to roll, right? And then revolutions is related to that because the U and the V are kind of interchangeable. So it's a soft, I tried this on my wife the other day. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm trying to communicate like the spirits of Jude." I sort of went, so it was a soft sort of murmur, but inwardly, it's got a ton of, at least it translated as fluent. There's a ton in there, but it comes across, it's not sort of, I want you to hear me now. No, it's, but there's a lot going on in there. So good job, Swedenborg. Impossible job to try to communicate this. So ipsa cogitatio. So that thought, and I mentioned before maybe that those TIO words in English, the word cogitation, I don't know, kind of feels a little dry, but you can often put an ing on it when you translate these TIOs. So in other words, the thinking itself, I think partly what he's driving at is that in our case, thought happens, and then you think, okay, often don't you say, what would the word for that be? Or how would I describe this? You're trying to figure out. But here he's saying the thinking itself, the thought process itself, thus rolls itself out. Say evolve it to evolvo. It rolls itself out, apud illos, in their case, in loquelam, into speech. It's not mediated. The thought, here comes the thought. It's a cogitative type of communication. Who knows what he means? Then he'll tell you why it's this way, even though we don't know quite how it is yet. But go for it. And you notice that's a colon, a little longer pause. Okay, so we might do a paragraph break or something like that. Causa est quia. In English, it's not great to say the reason is because. We would say the reason is that, but the reason is that, and then this is a fun phrase, ex genio inter spirituales et coelestes medio sunt, semicolon, the ex and the genio go with the medio, but look how far away it is. It's like half a line away. That genio and medio, and that's one of those things that Latin can do. It can throw the medio down the other end of the street because this time they actually even have the same ending. But the main point is that they have the same case and number and gender and so on. So you can see that, medio goes with genio, even though it's down the other end of the sentence. And then the fun thing is that medio means midway. And then the inter spirituales et coelestes is what it's midway between. So it's almost reversed. it says that it's midway between these two things, but really these two things are between the Latin noun and the adjective. And genio is our word genius. That gen root comes from Greek, and it often has to do with birth. It would be like your inborn nature, something like that. So their nature, their genius, their, the way they are, these people are, and sunt ex, a little difficult to render into English, but they are of, it's not how we would say it. We would say they have, or something like that. They are of a genius that's midway between these two things.
Oh.
So they have a genius, or their genius might be the way that we would say it in English. Their inborn nature is midway between spiritual no noun and heavenly no noun. Great, but plurals, and plurals masculine or feminine, not neuter, because they would be IA on the end if they were neuter. So spiritual people or spirits or beings or something, and heavenly spirits or beings. So their nature is midway. So this is interesting because Swedenborg often has these grand categories. And you have this grand category called spiritual, this grand category called heavenly. But these people are midway between. I didn't know there was a between, but there's a between there of these two different natures. And he's going to tell us a little bit about it. I can tell you that a lot of places he talks about that spiritual people, the way he describes it, the way he uses that term, are they're intellectual. They're thought-based. That's the way they function. And the heavenly are emotional and warm. They're love-based. And of course, both have both and everything, but it depends on what predominates or how you go about things. Do you just feel them intuitively, or do you have to go through a thought process to get there? And so these are these grand categories of types of spirits and beings, and they're midway between them. So more grand leaps. And he's going to talk about the way that these two communicate. Spirituales enim. Enim is called a post-positive, but it's another linking word. It's like for he's a jolly good fellow. It's like that. We don't use that so much anymore. But what is that word doing there? Do you have to translate it? Well, he's hooking this whole thing into one sentence. He's got to have it hang together. It's 30 feet long, you don't want the pieces falling out. So enim hooks it together. For the spirituales, those who are spiritual beings, spiritual spirits, spiritual people, speak sonore. Oh, there it is again. Only this time it's an adverb. Sonore. They speak sonorously. Again, well, what is he talking about? I think he out loud or something, right? Like you use articulated speech. And omne, this all comes in the wrong order, but in yikiunt, that's the verb, and the subject of it is spirituales. And so they do this. They speak sonorously. They speak in articulated speech, and they inject omne cogitationis sui loqueli. They inject everything of their thought into speech. So it all goes in. And what you're getting, he doesn't say this exactly, but I think the implication might be that it's a very high percentage of thought content in what they're saying. I mean, in other words, it's a lot about, I was thinking this and I thought that, and this makes sense to me or something. That's what they're saying. He says all of it, all of their thought, they inject into what they're saying, into their communication. Unde, from whence, or from which, another piece of connective tissue. Cogitatio illorum, their thought process, their plans. Ut sciatur, so that it might be known, not the order we would have done it in. Collegenda est ex vocibus, has to be put together from the words. Some assembly required. So you hear them say it all out, and then you have to go, okay, I think, oh, I see. Okay, I think I get what they're driving at. So the thought comes out. It's a lot about the thinking, and it's how they inject this whole thing of their thinking into this speech. And therefore, if you want to know what on earth they're talking about, you have to piece it together from the words that they use. That's the medium of communication. At, but, coelestes non ita, but the heavenly, not so. Said, but, so now we're going to get what, so the heavenly do it different. So how did the heavenly do it? In the case of the heavenly, but quod voluntatis illorum est, but that which is of their will, not the thinking. Their will. What is your will? Well, that would be their values and what they love and how they feel and things like that. The what belongs to their will, volvit, there's that word again. Had it several times in here, right? Volvit say, that's a reflexive pronoun, rolls itself out. So that which is of their will, so the other group, they put all their thought in, and it's all about the sounds, getting the sounds lined up and articulating something. And then you have to piece it back together again by going back from the words and getting back to the thought. The heavenly, not so, but that which belongs to their will rolls itself out through per aliquid cogitationis, through something of thought. There's a little thought content. I keep picturing something like a donut or something, and then it rolls through the icing sugar or something. It just gets a little bit on there on its way out. And then what happens to it? It comes in simile undi. This is almost like that quasi. It comes into something like a wave. So interesting. Quod alterius voluntatem secundum rei statum efficit et movet, which affects and moves. You have to go to the verb all the way at the end. The will of the other person. It's a resonance, isn't it? Like if you're around a big speaker, you go into a club and there's a big, and the chest is going boom, 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 it comes out like a wave. It comes like a wave and moves the will of the other person according to the state of the rei. The rei is the topic, the thing, whatever we're talking about, the topic. It affects and moves, and I'm interested that he felt like he had to say both of those words. It affects and moves the will of the other person. So if we were subject to this kind of communication, you might feel like, well, I am feeling something right now. I'm not in a cognitive state trying to piece together what the heck you're talking about from these words that you just laid out in front of me. I'm going, oh, I can feel that. I feel what you're feeling, It comes out like a wave. Now, there's several dots that Swedenborg did not connect in here, I would say. It's a fascinating passage, and that's where it ends. That's the end of it. He says some other things in the next passage, but it doesn't really bear on this. This is the whole number that we just read. So what didn't he say? Well, he didn't really tell us how do these guys fit in with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that, the reason is that their genius is halfway between these two. And so, okay, I've got to explain this now too. Poor Swedenborg, it's like, where do I start? Okay, so the spiritual have this communication that's word-based and you have to reassemble it. And then what can I tell you about the heavenly? It's like, and then you feel something. Did I murmur enough when I said that? And so the now you've got these characters who are partway in between. So their thought is cogitative. It's on the cogitative side of the equation, right? And yet it's got this murmur thing, and it's inwardly, it's got all this content, and it's like the ipsa cogitatio. It was like the thought itself. Now, I want to show you something else, friends. I don't know whether you have this crazy thing that I set out.
Yeah.
Felicia inspired me last time by going, I don't know how you did it, Felicia. You went and found, was it on that site from Sweden that where they give you the manuscripts?
We have in the office those big white books. I don't remember what they're
There you go.
called, but it's like a stack. And so
Yeah.
I just figured out
Photos,
where the
all right.
passage was.
You can also get these online. They've scanned them, and so that's really great. So here's that passage.
Would it be good if I shared a thought now on what you were just saying, or should I hold it?
Please do. Yeah.
Okay. Just that, I don't know if you were quite getting at this, but like that it's, the sense I get is that he's set up just in that original emphasized term, Roman, in the thing, the imaginative and the cogitation, and like, and then so it almost makes this equation of like the spiritual and the heavenly, and what you were saying in the beginning of like the way that you can think in words and it has some sort of impact, but then an image comes in and it's just like whoosh, like it almost feels like that imaginative is just the wave, like here you got it, and you
Right.
might see an image, but you're just feeling something because you somehow just get everything and it affects your will
I like that.
as much as you're like,
I
you
like
might
that.
cogitate from that idea, from that image that just came through, but like,
Yeah.
so.
And then these two beautiful words here that are highlighted at the beginning. One would be kind of a heart piece.
Exactly.
And one would be kind of a mind piece. And they're midway between these two things, which Swedenborg does say in Heaven and Hell, the best angels have that characteristic, that they're very balanced in the two sort of going full bore.
And I guess it's just interesting that like the imaginative element, my sense is he's making that and saying that's captured in what he's describing about the heavenly communication. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Somehow he ends with the heavenly and just stops there. But something about it suggests that that's what it's like. You hear this murmur, but it's also something's resonating or vibrating inside you when it happens.
Yeah.
And you're getting the thought that way. The pure heavenly are kind of light on thought. These guys have a lot of thought, and it's a thought-based communication, but it's the thought itself rolls out and affects you in some way like that. And I was fascinated to read this, inspired by Felicia, to look here because there are two long passages crossed out. There's a lot of crossing out in there. And some people, I think, had the idea that Swedenborg just his eyes rolled back into his head and then his hands started moving and the word came out. That's not the feeling I get from this. This is a guy who's really struggling to express something, And and here, this part that's crossed out, there's a whole like half a line and a full line and another half a line that's all crossed out there in the middle. And I was able to read it. It says, so this comes after the soft murmur, which is inwardly voluble. I'm a little frustrated that Swedenborg crossed this out and it didn't make it into his printed volume, because it helps me a little bit to understand. But this was not something the public had access to at the time. Now we do. So he continued the thought there, qui cogitativum inest, in which, in this soft, as it were, murmur, there is something cogitative in it, which makes sense. I mean, you can sort of piece that together from what he said. Yes, this murmur that's voluble inwardly has a thought in it. And then he says, the cogitativum quod inest, the cogitative element that is in it, transit immediate in cogitatione alterius. The cogitative thing which is in it crosses immediately, directly into the thought of the other person. And then he writes et volv, et volv quits.
Yeah.
But it's going to roll, it was going to roll. Something was going to happen with a rolling. And so I'm fascinated that helps me connect the dots, that what I felt was a little missing from this piece.
Yeah.
It's interesting that it would be in the palimpsest here, in the crossed out version, that their thought. So in the case of the heavenly, they have a feeling, it vibrates in you. In their case, they have a thought, and that thought crosses directly into you. We were talking last time about how thought comes down into language, and then to translate, you need to go back up here across and then come down into another language. Well, this is talking about just go straight across up there. Their thought goes right into the other person directly and starts doing some sort of rolling and then stops. Okay. The other.
Yeah. And does that really get at the heart of what he means by it being between the spiritual and the heavenly? Is like, it's thought-based, but it's coming right through, which is more of a heavenly thing. Okay. Yeah, who knows?
Exactly. And you have to sort of piece that together from the published version. You can kind of get there because it's sort of implied by the pieces. But again, you're having to do some assembly, And then toward the end, interestingly, also he says that with the spiritual, you have to put it together from the words. And then he says, but the celestial not so. And then there's some more crossing out. You can see that dark sort of mess down there. Where he starts saying various things about they speak not sonorously. No, it's crossed out. No, no. He uses the word affection, affectio, or desire. That often means. And then he crosses that out, and he's trying to get to it. And then he says, it comes down, this simile of a wave, there's something like a wave, comes down through something of thought into, and then before he writes the simile of the wave, he writes into something waving, into something waving, and then he goes, into a simile of a wave. And I wonder whether the something waving just would sound like this or something, but he wanted to get across that it's a let's call it a wave. I don't know what else to call it, but something is moving like a wave. And then in the gap there, he writes, as far as I can read it, quae movet alterius quod imaginativum alterius, which moves the other person, and then crosses that out and then writes, which moves the imagination, the imaginativum of the other person. Now, I kind of wish he'd left that in the final mix, because I think that helps a little bit, that he's talking about a direct transmission, that their mental pictures are like, oh, I can see it. Direct transmission. You don't have to go down into words and try to piece it together or get a different sense or a different mental image or something. Something goes straight across. But he, for some reason, hesitated, and it didn't end up in the final cut. I don't know why, but I found that a very interesting exercise and helpful to read it's a rare situation. You don't usually find that much juice, that much,
thinking it through
in the crossed out stuff.
Yeah.
The crossed out stuff is very hard to read, very, very hard to read. And
what's super cool or interesting is like that crossed out bit, but he uses exactly the imaginative, word there. So he kind of when he's talking about the heavenly ones. So our sort of hunch of like, I think up there, when he said imaginative, he's making that as like this heavenly thing. And then the cogitato is the spiritual thing. And so it's so interesting that he's got it right there, although it didn't make it he never circles that back in what he actually ended up publishing.
No. Again, when I read it, I sort of felt like, well, there must be some, this plus this equals, so therefore what they're doing is it's some sort of, because he said it was very cogitative, and yet he says the heavenly do this thing where you resonate. And so do you mean that there's some resonance? I was fascinated that when you went into the stuff that he crossed out, it was quite explicit. A mediate without means. Media is it, like he said, medio, they're midway in between. There's no midway, there's nothing midway, there's no medium. It's immediate, it's direct. Is the way we all translate it in the NCE, that comes directly into, which is such a cool idea.
Well, and it also makes me think of sound waves, like, and wonder about when the science of sound and sound waves kind of got going. Because this would be what he's talking about is sort of in a way analogous to sound waves, but like the non-physical version. Not that sound is physical, but like, it's even more ephemeral, or, what's that?
Right.
That it's spiritual. But then also, I can't help but just in terms of loose association, think of Jupiter, Jove, think of Zeus, think of thunder, think of being sort of hit by like a sound, sort of
nice
type of
I
thing.
like that.
Experience of being so moved by the rolling thunder sound waves.
I love that. The science of sound Swedenborg wrote a brief work in Swedish called Om Echo, which really intrigued me. So he was interested in sound. He was interested in echoes and how things worked. And I have thought, I don't remember seeing Swedenborg say this per se, but that low frequencies definitely map onto emotion, and high frequencies map onto thoughts, like the clarity, the speech, the zone up there in 1 or 2 kilohertz where you can really you can hear what somebody's talking about. That's why when they did the phone, they just sort of emphasized that one frequency, because then you can hear what the person's saying. But you're maybe missing some of the tone from the warmth that would come across if you heard it in a more full way. And every movie theater has those huge subwoofers, because part of the experience of going to a theater is that you're going to hear a bottom end on there is going to shake the building, when that spacecraft comes over or whatever, the emotion. If it sounded like it was on your phone, this little spaceship goes by. I think there is something really to that the thunder, the idea of that, something that really moves you and affects you, and resonance was the word that kept coming to my mind. One of the problems I have with researching Swedenborg a lot is that I'll read a passage like this and I love it. I'll file it in my mind under resonate or resonance. It doesn't use that word, It has sonorous and stuff like that. So I might, if I try sound, I might be able to get back, but I file it under the wrong word.
You have to be writing your own indexes, Jonathan.
That's right.
To keep track, so we can just have the resonance.
Then I go, oh yeah, that was the way. Right, that's the resonate one, right? But I would remember probably that wave, because the wave idea is so great, isn't it? Like, like, oh, you feel it. And I thought that was cool. A cool way to describe communication.
Well, and also just to mention real quick that I'm remembering in my dissertation defense, I can't remember exactly why, but I was bringing up cetaceans and their communication with,
right.
sonar or echolocation. Right. I can't remember what it's called, but right. I kind of had this sense that I said in my presentation, I'm like, I think they might be more sentient than humans, because they have this, their brains are much bigger for one thing, and they communicate at these like subsonic ways across miles. Also elephants, like they feel, and they are always making these sounds that we can't really hear, and they feel them through their feet across miles through the ground. I mean, again, that deep
That's awesome.
sound sort of thing. I'm also thinking of.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ray, did you? Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
well, what's really getting me about the end of the passage is like, not only do you hear the sound or you feel it, but like it moves your will. Like it impacts a person's will. When it says a listener, it moves the listener's will in accordance with the state of the matter at hand, which, like, influencing somebody. I mean, is that what that means? Like you just can feel this and you're influenced or moved in a certain way.
That is a big thing. Yeah. I mean, I love that you singled that out because, wow. Yeah, advertisers would love to get a hold of that.
Like it seems like it could be a little nefarious, maybe, but
Yeah,
not,
right.
because these are heavenly.
They're heavenly beings. So you
They're
trust
heavenly beings. So
with that power. That's right. With awesome power comes awesome responsibility. And they, um, uh, because you would think that moving your will would not just mean that you would have an emotional response, but that you would act like your values or your drive or where you're going in your life or something like that would be affected. Yeah, if that fell into the wrong hands, that would be nasty. Yeah, right.
It's really great. Yeah.
What a thing to say. What an effective form of communication if you could actually move somebody else's will. I never thought about that, but yes, that would need to be a carefully guarded secret how to do that.
But I'm curious too about the re statum, like in accordance with the state of the topic, I think is how it's rendered. But I do wonder if that touches on the state of the matter at hand. But it just, like, state is something he describes so much when it comes to a person's state of mind. So it's like, maybe I'm just not catching what he's talking about, that like moving the listener's will in accordance with the state of the matter at hand just makes me think of like, well, maybe it's in accordance with, like, that whole like respecting the person's freedom of like what they might think about this matter. It's going to move their will, but it's like going to be in accordance, not overriding.
Point.
But I might thinking that that's applying to something else, and then it's not. Like if the state is of the matter and not of like the listener with respect to the matter at hand, I guess is what I like. I would wonder if it could work to say in accordance with the state of the listener with respect to the matter at hand or something.
Yeah, it's interesting what that state is in there. The word situation comes to mind, but yes, that's quite vague language. Like the word thing is horrendously vague. State is quite vague because he doesn't specify, what state, but these are sort of universal principles of how they communicate.
Yeah.
It would be fun. It relates in my mind all of a sudden to what people have described in near-death experiences, where they meet these beings of love, where it's just like this unconditional love, and that's, to feel that, like to be in someone's presence, to feel that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a cognitive piece, or they're asking questions, or but like, that's a powerful part. Seems like maybe they're encountering those kinds of spirits who would be affecting your heart. And another thought is that although Swedenborg took us 5 leagues into Weirdland here, it still ends up being, you can't take your eyes off it. Like, what is, because it feels like this doesn't feel like somebody just blowing smoke or so, what are you talking about? I'm fascinated. I've been thinking about this.
That's what I'm left with. I'm like, okay, so the inhabitants of Jupiter, they're somewhere midway between the spiritual and the heavenly. Okay, but like, what's the significance of that? Does it go on? Is there more? Like, it just leaves me hanging.
It feels a bit like a geographer, or like, somebody, studying anthropologist or something. But like, sort of expressing, well, here's what's possible in terms of like, well, we talk, and then you have to kind of get what I'm saying, and then you maybe get what I'm talking about. And then there's this like, you hear me, these spirits or people, inhabitants just murmur, but you get exactly what they're talking about in that murmuring. And then there's heavenly communication where you're just feeling it, and it's this movement of your will. I guess, like, I don't know if he makes the case for these inhabitants like with Jupiter, but so much of what Swedenborg says is like, well, there's parts of our own spirit that are connected to these things, you know, like if he, like that whole in the grand human, like where they are in the universal human means that it's mapped on us too. That's one of Swedenborg's points. Like these people exist in some, we're a microcosm of the same thing. So like theoretically you can find those parts of you in yourself or somehow, and somehow that could be useful to you because we're all you know, it's that like fractal, like we have it all inside of us or something. So maybe there's some significance there.
That's part of what I took from it. A thought which I like, it's similar to the passage we looked at last time, that communication has many layers. It definitely gets that layered thing across. There are different ways, entirely different ways for people to communicate. And there's this one, and there's that one, and then there's one that's in between. And also it does kind of privilege, like I suppose you could think that well, the greatest things, the greatest invention of the human race is language, you know, speech, being able to communicate is amazing. How you can communicate complex ideas and write whole books or have whole movies and convey things. And yet here Swedenborg is saying words are, they're okay, they're fine, you know, and that's his medium. So it's very ironic because we're reading his words and trying to piece together what he means. But there's this whole level above that, and there are different nuances within it. And it does, to my mind, make me think about, try to reflect on states where your thinking is on that higher level. It does, for one thing. I mean, I think that some people, I don't know, painting with a broad brush here, but treat it like, well, imagination's great for elementary school, you know, oh, kids, you know, dream up this and or something. But like you leave that behind, and then you get to more serious adult thought. And this seems to privilege something about that. Like imagination is really cool, and what a great way to convey something to somebody else, to have this whole imaging or visualization or whatever that means. It's just, it seems like a higher form of thought, and yet it partakes of both. So that's cool. It's got that emotional communication or the resonance factor in there, but it's also heavily thought-based. In fact, he says it is their thought itself kind of transmitted into you if you look at the part that he crossed out. So
Yeah.
very cool.
Well, I have a closing thought that is somewhat, you know, meta to all of this, but it just makes me think about like what we're doing here with going through this translation. And it really strikes me that like when we read the Latin, it almost feels like it, because we're translating from another language, it forces us just to go onto the level of thought immediately. We're not tripped up by the words. We have to just read these words mean nothing to me, but I'm going to get at the thought that's behind it. Try to, you know, in whatever way that we can, like, you know, because like we just talked, we didn't translate it. We just, or, you know, like we didn't compose a translation. We just walked through the thought of it through translating, I guess. And like, and then it makes me think about how that it's like the difference between reading a book and watching a movie. You know, like when you read a book, you have your own imagination. There's this freedom of imagination and association, and you get to be in this space transported. But then you watch a movie and, well, somebody made the decision for you. You know, they're wearing blue and it's a rainy day, whatever. Like, and so this feels like, reading a book where it's like we get to just read what he's trying to put into words and we get to imagine about it. Whereas in English, there kind of is a, certain words might just have a certain culture, it just limits it a little bit to like, be sort of, okay, now I have to work from the English and think, what does this mean? Or something. There's just something freer about just engaging directly with the Latin. That's what I'm noticing.
That's great. I certainly feel not as sort of a self-consciously adopted approach, but just because I don't know what it's saying. That I really could be quite wrong. We could go along and then find out, oh no, those neuter adjectives have this flavor, or
Yeah.
but I think there's something cool about it. Swedenborg talks about the fact that the ancient Hebrew had no vowel sound, that all the letters were consonants, and originally it was not pointed. And so you could read the same word. One person could see it as a noun, another one could see it as a verb, and there were no spaces between words. So you couldn't really tell where one thing began, another thing. And so people could get quite different readings out of it, out of the same text. And so it does feel like we touch something pretty deep when we go into a passage like that. And it's fun to be able to do this also, because when you're translating, you have the horrible job of trying to pick.
Yeah.
Well, am I going to call it imagination? Am I going to call it imaginative capacity or faculty? Or am I going to use some other word, visualization or picturing or something? You have to choose. But in a setting like this, we can just leave all those options floating in the air as possibilities of what it means and think about it.
Right.
Also, just I have in the back of my mind right now, I'm working on a sort of early stage manuscript that's an interview between the interviewer and the classical composer, Tommy Haugland.
Oh, yeah.
And
Right.
Haugland is discussing his creative process and sort of the realms that he visits in this deep, very involved way when he composes. And so I kind of have that echoing a bit in the background as we're reading this passage. And because a composer, an artist, is translating in a way, in the way that Swedenborg is kind of trying to take these experiences he's having and putting them into words. Haugland's taking these experiences he's having and putting them into music. And then also I was at the Louvre today because I'm in Paris. And so I have these images of these sculptures, and like I was really fascinated by like the like Greek antiquity, like these early, like 1 AD or 500 BC or whatever it was, and just the shapes, So I have these like all these different things in my head right now of like the creative imagination and the attempt to take experience that's very not material and move it into something that we can relate to sort of horizontally. You see that struggle, especially in Swedenborg's handwriting.
Yeah. And ultimately it makes me think Swedenborg wants to get back to the point where you feel it. I think a lot of people, when they're starting out with Swedenborg, they get tangled up in their minds and what is he talking about, and it seems so weird and everything. And to get back to that kind of visceral experience you have when you see this ancient sculpture, that's to think about how long ago, the different mindset and the different attitude to life that was on the part of people putting that together. And that's cool to think about, trying to get back to that, the sort of resonant response. Thank you so much. This was just a blast.
It's so funny. I have this experience of like, we just went through for a walk through like a forest, like the forest of the Neo-Latin, and then the looking to the English, and looking to the, like, it's somehow I'm seeing the words as like trees and shrubs and stuff.
That's the imaginative that you're having, the experience that you're having.
I imagio.
Yeah.
I like that. And it is like that because you're both zeroing in on it, look at this leaf or look at that fruit, but then trying to get a sense of the sweep of the path and where are we? And,
Mm,
you know,
And
geography.
it's a whole experience for sure. Like it's not just, that's what I'm amazed. You slow down time so that we're just spending so much time on just a little half of a sentence, but it just, there's so much richness there and, things to consider. And so
that's
yeah,
right.
it's pretty cool.
It's fun that way because reading the whole thing out loud in Latin or English, I don't know, you do audiobooks with 45 seconds or a minute and a half or something. Yeah, it's not long, right? It's not going to be,
Yeah.
Right.
it shoots past. Shoo.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You're sort of
Mhm.
left with one little thought at the end or something, but it's really fun to dive in because there's a lot going on in there. It feels like the
Yeah.
different parts of the sentence are talking to each other in interesting ways.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much,
Thank you, friends.
everybody.
Thank you.
Arcana Coelestia 8733. I'll read the heading as well as the text. Continuatio de spiritibus et incolis teloris Jovis. Spiritus teloris Jovis, quia in maximo homine referunt imaginativum cogitationes, parum loquuntur et multum cogitant. Et cum loquuntur, est loquela illorum cogitativa, quae ab aliorum loquelis differt in eo, quod non terminatur ita in sonorum, sed in mole quasi murmur, quod intus volubile est. Ipsa cogitatio sic se evolvit apud illos in loquelam. Causa est quia ex genio inter spirituales et coelestes medio sunt. Spirituales enim loquuntur sonore, ac omne cogitationes suae injiciunt loquelae, unde cogitatio illorum ut sciatur colligenda est ex vocibus. At coelestes non ita, sed quod voluntatis illorum est, volvit se per aliquid cogitationis in simile undae, quod alterius voluntatem secundum rei statum afficit et movet.
Secrets of Heaven 8733. The Spirits and Inhabitants of Jupiter continued. Because spirits from Jupiter relate to imaginative thought in the universal human, they think much and say little. When they do speak, they employ thought speech, which differs from other kinds of speech by terminating not so much in an audible sound as in a soft murmur with a fluent undertone. Thus with them, the thought itself evolves into speech. That is because their inborn nature falls midway between the spiritual and the heavenly. Spiritual people talk in an audible way, and they put all their thoughts into words. So if you want to know what they are thinking, you have to infer it from what they say. The heavenly are not so. The impulses of their will, borrowing somewhat from their thoughts, roll out in a sort of wave that touches and moves the listener's will, in accordance with the state of the matter at hand.